The red warning lights flashed across the command bridge of Kepler Station like angry eyes in the darkness. Admiral Zethara pressed her four-fingered hands against the metal railing as she watched the battle unfold on the main screen. Her blue skin had turned pale with fear, and her long ears drooped with exhaustion. "Ma'am, we've lost the outer defense ring," reported Commander Vextok, his voice shaking through his translator device. "The Vorth have broken through our last line of ships." Zethara nodded slowly. She had expected this moment for weeks now, but it still felt like a punch to the stomach. Around her, officers from 12 different alien species worked frantically at their stations. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like walking crystals. But they all shared the same look of desperation. The Vorth swarm had been sweeping across the galaxy for 3 years now. They were like a plague of living ships that ate everything in their path. No one knew where they came from originally. They just appeared one day at the edge of the galaxy and started consuming entire star systems. At first, the great civilizations had tried to fight alone. The proud Altarians with their energy shields, the ancient Nexari with their crystal technology, the mighty Kethmor with their gas giant factories. One by one, they all fell to the endless hunger of the swarm. "How many enemy ships are out there?" Zethara asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Our computer stopped counting at 5 million, ma'am," replied the tactical officer, a insect-like being whose antenna twitched nervously. "But there are more coming through the jump points every minute." Through the station's massive windows, Zethara could see the battle raging in space. The Vorth bioships looked like giant beetles crossed with sharks. They moved in perfect coordination, like parts of one huge organism, which she supposed they were. The Vorth shared one mind across their entire species. Coalition ships exploded like fireworks against the black void. Each flash of light meant hundreds of brave souls lost forever. Ships from a dozen worlds fought side by side, their different technologies creating a rainbow of weapon fire. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough against the swarm. "Ma'am, the Crystal Heart is taking heavy damage," called out the communications officer. "Captain Silenth requests permission to ram the enemy formation." Zethara closed her eyes for a moment. The Crystal Heart was a Nexari vessel, beautiful and deadly, with weapons that could slice through space itself. But now it was asking to die in a final act of defiance. "Permission granted," she said quietly. "Tell Captain Silenth that his sacrifice will be remembered." On the screen, the crystalline ship turned toward the thickest part of the swarm. Its hull glowed brighter and brighter as it charged its final weapon. Then it exploded in a burst of pure light, taking dozens of Vorth ships with it. But for every enemy destroyed, 10 more took its place. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority message from the evacuation ships," the communications officer said, his voice breaking. "The civilian transports can't get past the swarm blockade. They're trapped in the system." Zethara felt her heart sink even lower. 2 million civilians from all over the galaxy had fled to this system when their worlds fell. Men, women, and children from species that had never trusted each other before now huddled together in cargo ships, hoping someone could save them. "What about the quantum tunnel?" she asked. "Can we open an escape route?" The chief engineer, a blob-like creature from the water world of Aquos, made a sound like bubbling water. Through his translator, his words came out flat and emotionless. "Negative, ma'am. The swarm has some kind of jamming field. We can't open a stable tunnel with all their bioships around." A new alarm began wailing. The station shook as Vorth creatures began landing on the outer hull. These weren't ships, but actual living beings the size of houses. They had claws that could cut through metal and acid that could melt through shields. "They're trying to board us," announced the security chief. "All defensive teams to battle stations." Through the internal cameras, Zethara watched her people prepare for the final fight. Soldiers from different worlds stood shoulder to shoulder in the corridors. Some carried energy weapons, others had projectile guns, and a few wielded ancient swords passed down through their families. They all knew this was likely their last battle. "Ma'am," the communications officer called out urgently, "I'm getting reports from all sectors. The swarm isn't just attacking us anymore. They're positioning themselves around the entire system. I think they're preparing to consume everything at once." Zethara understood what that meant. The Vorth didn't just destroy their enemies. They absorbed them. Every ship, every station, every living being would be broken down and added to the swarm. It was a fate worse than simple death. She looked around the bridge at all the different species working together. 3 years ago, many of these races had been enemies. The Altarians and the Kethmor had fought border wars for centuries. The Nexari had considered most other species beneath their notice. But facing extinction had taught them all a hard lesson about the value of cooperation. Too bad they had learned it too late. "Send out one final message on all frequencies," Zethara ordered. "Emergency broadcast to any ships or stations that might still be out there." The communications officer nodded and opened the channel. Zethara straightened her uniform and looked directly into the camera. "This is Admiral Zethara of the Galactic Defense Coalition, broadcasting from Kepler Station. We are under attack by the Vorth swarm. Our defenses have failed, and we estimate complete system loss within 6 hours. To any vessels receiving this transmission, do not approach this system. The enemy numbers in the millions. Save yourselves and preserve what remains of galactic civilization." She paused, thinking of all the worlds that had already fallen, all the friends she had lost, all the children who would never grow up. "If anyone is listening to this message in the future, know that we fought to the end. Know that species who had been enemies for centuries stood together when it mattered most. And know that we never stopped believing that somewhere out there, someone would find a way to stop this darkness." She nodded to the communications officer, who closed the channel. The station shook again as more Vorth creatures landed on the hull. Through the walls, she could hear the sound of metal being torn apart. Emergency lights flickered as power systems failed one by one. "All hands prepare for final defensive positions," she announced over the station's intercom. "It has been an honor serving with all of you." As alarms wailed and the lights dimmed, Admiral Zethara took one last look at the starfield beyond the windows. Somewhere out there in the vast darkness, maybe someone would remember them. Maybe someone would learn from their sacrifice. But for now, all she could do was face the end with dignity and hope that death would come quickly. The swarm was coming, and there was nowhere left to run. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows across the bridge as Admiral Zethara watched her tactical display. Red dots swarmed around Kepler Station like angry insects. Each dot represented thousands of Vorth creatures ready to tear apart everything in their path. "Hull breach on level 7, reported the damage control officer. "The creatures are inside the station now." Zethara could hear weapons fire echoing through the corridors. Her people were fighting bravely, but everyone knew it was hopeless. The Vorth didn't just kill their enemies. They absorbed them into the swarm, turning victims into more weapons against the living. "Ma'am," the sensor operator called out, his voice confused. "I'm getting some very strange readings from the outer system." "Strange how?" Zethara asked, though she couldn't imagine what could be stranger than their current situation. "There are new contacts appearing on the edge of sensor range. Big ones. Really big." The operator's hands danced over his controls, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Whatever they are, they're moving fast. Faster than anything I've ever seen." Zethara frowned. The Vorth had been reinforcing their attack for hours. Maybe these were just more enemy ships coming to finish the job. She moved to the sensor station and looked at the display herself. Her breath caught in her throat. The new contacts were huge. Not as numerous as the swarm, but each individual ship was massive. Bigger than the largest coalition dreadnought. Bigger than anything in the galactic databases. "Are they Vorth?" she asked. "No, ma'am. The energy signatures are completely different. I've never seen anything like this technology." Another officer called out from across the bridge. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from the unknown contacts." Zethara felt a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope, but maybe curiosity. "Put it on the main screen." The image that appeared made every being on the bridge stop what they were doing. The creature speaking looked almost familiar, but wrong in subtle ways. It stood upright like many species did, but its skin was smooth and pink. It had only 2 eyes positioned at the front of its head and no visible scales, fur, or natural armor. Most disturbing of all, it looked soft. Like something that couldn't possibly survive in the harsh galaxy. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect galactic standard, but with an accent no one recognized. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress call." The creature's voice was calm and steady, showing no fear despite the massive battle raging in the system. "Kepler Station, please hold your position. Help is on the way." The communications officer looked at Zethara with wide eyes. "Ma'am, I'm checking all our databases. There's no record of any species called Terrans anywhere in galactic civilization." "Maybe they're from the unexplored regions," suggested the tactical officer. There are still parts of the galaxy we haven't mapped. On the sensor display, the unknown ships were accelerating toward the battle zone. Their speed was incredible. Coalition ships needed hours to cross a star system. These vessels were doing it in minutes. "Admiral Chen," Zethara responded, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "This is Admiral Zethara of the Galactic Defense Coalition. We appreciate any assistance, but you should know what you're facing. The Vorth Swarm has over 5 million ships in this system. Their technology absorbs everything they touch. Many great civilizations have fallen to them already." The human on the screen smiled. It was a strange expression, showing white teeth that looked almost like fangs. "We've been watching their expansion for some time, Admiral. We know what they're capable of, but we have some capabilities of our own." As if to prove the point, the human ships suddenly appeared on the tactical display much closer than they should have been possible. Whatever drive system they were using, it bent the normal rules of space travel. "Impossible," breathed the sensor operator. "They just jumped 30 million kilometers in an instant. Our ships can't do that." The lead human vessel was now close enough for detailed scans. It looked nothing like any ship in the galactic databases, where most civilized species built their ships with curves and organic lines. This vessel was all sharp angles and brutal efficiency. Weapons ports covered its hull like the spines of some predatory creature. "Admiral Chen," Zethara said urgently, "you need to understand the danger. The Vorth don't just defeat their enemies, they consume them. Everything they touch becomes part of the swarm. If they capture your ships—" "We appreciate the warning," the human replied, "but we didn't come here to run away." The first Vorth ships had noticed the newcomers and were turning to face this new threat. Bioships that looked like massive insects began forming attack formations, their living hulls pulsing with hostile energy. Unknown vessels came a new transmission, this one in the horrible clicking language of the Vorth swarm. The station's computers automatically translated the words, "You will be absorbed. Resistance is futile. Join the swarm." Admiral Chen's response was immediate and shocking in its casualness. "Thanks for the offer, but we'll pass." What happened next would be talked about in every bar and meeting, hauled across the galaxy for generations to come. The human ships opened fire, but these weren't the elegant energy beams or guided projectiles that civilized species used. These were primitive kinetic weapons that threw pieces of metal at incredible speeds, crude missiles that exploded with chemical explosives instead of exotic matter, and they were devastatingly effective. The first salvo from the human fleet tore through a Vorth formation like it was made of paper. Bioships that had shrugged off the most advanced coalition weapons simply came apart under the primitive but overwhelming firepower. "How is that possible?" gasped the tactical officer. "Those weapons shouldn't be able to penetrate Vorth bioarmor." But the humans weren't finished. Their ships moved through space in ways that made experienced naval officers dizzy to watch. They spun and rolled and dove like atmospheric fighters rather than massive starships. Their formation patterns seemed chaotic and random, but somehow they always ended up in exactly the right place to deliver maximum damage. "Ma'am," the communications officer called out, his voice full of wonder. "The swarm formations they're breaking apart. The Vorth ships are actually retreating from some sectors." Zethara stared at the tactical display in disbelief. For 3 years, the Vorth swarm had been unstoppable. They had crushed every fleet sent against them, absorbed every defense, consumed entire star systems without ever showing the slightest hesitation. Now, for the first time since the war began, they were backing down. "Admiral Chen," Zethara said into the communicator, hardly believing her own words, "it appears your weapons are effective against swarm biotechnology. How is that possible?" The human's smile grew wider. "Let's just say we've had a lot of practice dealing with hostile life forms. On our world, everything is trying to kill you from the day you're born. Makes you creative when it comes to solving problems." As if to emphasize the point, a group of human fighters detached from the main fleet and dove straight into the heart of the swarm formation. They moved like nothing Zethara had ever seen, weaving between bioships and unleashing destruction with every pass. The Vorth began to retreat. For the first time in 3 years, the unstoppable swarm was running away, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Admiral Zethara began to understand that everything was about to change. Captain Marcus Rivera checked his weapon one more time as the boarding pod raced toward Kepler Station. Around him, 20 other human Marines sat in calm silence. their faces painted with strange patterns and their armor covered in symbols he didn't recognize. 30 seconds to contact, announced the pilot through the intercom. Remember, people, the station's been partially overrun. Expect heavy resistance, Marcus nodded and keyed his radio. All right, listen up. Intel says the Vorth have breached the reactor level. If that goes critical, everyone in this system dies. Our job is to get in there and hold the line until the engineers can stabilize it. Through the pod's small window, he could see the massive bulk of Kepler Station growing larger. The alien structure was beautiful in its own way, with flowing curves that reminded him of some deep-sea creature. But now it was covered with the ugly growths of Vorth bioships like parasites feeding on a whale. "Sir," called out Sergeant Williams, a tough woman from the Mars colonies. "What do we know about these coalition soldiers?" "Can they fight?" "They've been holding out against impossible odds for 3 years," Marcus replied. "That tells me they've got heart. Heart counts for a lot in a fight." The pod shuddered as it made contact with the station's hull. Cutting charges burned through the metal and suddenly they were inside an alien corridor, filled with strange air and stranger smells. "Move out," Marcus ordered. "Stay tight. Watch your corners." They advanced through the station in standard formation, their weapons ready for anything. The corridor was wider than human ships would need, built for species that were larger or simply preferred more space. Emergency lighting cast weird shadows that made every corner look like it might hide enemies. The first coalition soldier they met was a tall, blue-skinned being with 4 arms. It was wounded and leaning against a wall, but it still raised its weapon when it saw them coming. "Easy there, friend," Marcus said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "We're here to help." "Terran Defense Fleet," the alien's translator crackled as it spoke. "Terran, I do not know this species, but if you fight the swarm, you are welcome." "How bad is it down below?" Marcus asked. "Very bad. The creatures broke through on level 7. My squad held them as long as we could, but—" the alien gestured to its wounds. "They are unlike anything we have fought before. They learn from every attack, adapt to every weapon." Marcus nodded grimly. "Well, they haven't met us yet. Williams, take half the squad and escort this soldier to medical. The rest of you with me." They pressed deeper into the station, following signs in a dozen different alien languages toward the reactor core. The sounds of battle grew louder as they descended. Energy weapons discharged in sharp cracks while something that sounded like giant insects chittered in the darkness. When they reached level 7, they found chaos. Coalition soldiers from various species had formed a defensive line across a wide intersection. Some were tall and graceful, others short and stocky. A few looked like they were made of living crystal. But they all fought with the same desperate courage as the Vorth creatures pressed against their position. The enemy was worse than Marcus had imagined. The creatures looked like a nightmare cross between spiders and sharks with too many legs and too many teeth. They moved with perfect coordination, like parts of a single organism. Worst of all, they seemed to learn from every attack, adapting their tactics in real time. "This is Captain Rivera, Terran Defense Fleet," he announced over the general frequency. "We're here to reinforce your position." A voice responded in accented galactic standard. "This is Lieutenant Kexmore of the Altarian Guard. Thank the Void you are here. We cannot hold much longer." Marcus studied the tactical situation quickly. The coalition forces were stretched thin across multiple corridors, trying to keep the Vorth from reaching the reactor core. Their weapons were precise and elegant, but they weren't doing enough damage to stop the swarm of creatures. "Change of plans," Marcus announced. "Fall back to defensive positions around the reactor core. We're going to make our stand there." "Sir," one of the coalition officers protested, "if we fall back, the creatures will have access to the entire level." "Trust me on this," Marcus replied. He turned to his Marines. "Set up the heavy weapons at the core entrance. I want overlapping fields of fire, and break out the special ammunition." His soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, setting up defensive positions that would have made their drill instructors proud. They used furniture and equipment to create barriers, positioned their weapons to cover every approach, and prepared nasty surprises for anything that tried to break through. The coalition soldiers watched in fascination as the humans worked. Their movements were quick and purposeful, without the elegant ceremony that marked most galactic military traditions. These beings fought like they had been doing it their entire lives. "Captain," asked Lieutenant Kexmore, "what is this special ammunition you mentioned?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Something we developed for the nastier predators back home." High explosive rounds with chemical accelerants. They burn hot enough to melt through just about anything. Your world has predators that require such weapons? The alien asked in amazement. You'd be surprised what lives in Earth's oceans, Marcus replied. Or in Australia. The Vorth creatures came in a wave of chittering death. They poured down the corridors like a living flood, their claws clicking against the metal floors as they rushed toward the human positions. Marcus waited until they were almost on top of the barricades before giving the order. Open fire. The sound was incredible. Human weapons didn't make the clean zapping noise of energy beams. They roared like thunder, filling the air with smoke and the smell of burning chemicals. The special ammunition tore through Vorth bioarmor like it was tissue paper, and the explosive rounds left craters in the walls. But more importantly, the creatures were dying. Not just wounded or stunned, but actually dying. For the first time since the Coalition soldiers had faced the swarm, their enemies stayed down when they were shot. How are you doing that? Lieutenant Kexmore shouted over the gunfire. Our weapons barely slow them down. Kinetic energy and chemical explosives, Marcus shouted back as he reloaded. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Wave after wave of Vorth creatures threw themselves against the human defensive line, and wave after wave was cut down by the thunder of primitive but effective weapons. Finally, the attack stopped. The corridor fell silent except for the ringing in everyone's ears and the groans of wounded soldiers. Status report, Marcus called out. Reactor core is secure, reported one of his engineers. Those burns on the containment unit look worse than they are. Give me an hour and I'll have everything running at full capacity. Lieutenant Kexmore approached Marcus, his forearms spread in what the captain assumed was a gesture of respect. I have fought in many battles, but I have never seen anything like this. Your species fights with a ferocity that matches the swarm itself. The difference is we know when to stop, Marcus replied, checking his ammunition. The Vorth just consume everything. We fight to protect something. Through the station's communication system, they could hear reports from the space battle above. The Terran fleet was systematically dismantling Vorth formations that had seemed invincible just hours before. For the first time in 3 years, the tide was turning. Captain Rivera, came Admiral Chen's voice over the radio. Nice work down there. How are our new allies holding up? Marcus looked around at the Coalition soldiers. Despite their different appearances, they all wore the same expression of amazement and growing hope. They're tougher than they look, he replied. I think they're going to do just fine. As if to prove his point, Lieutenant Kexmore was already organizing repair crews and medical teams, moving with new confidence now that victory seemed possible. The swarm had met humanity, and for the first time in their existence, they had been forced to retreat. Everything was about to change. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood at the front of the conference room aboard Kepler Station, looking out at the most diverse gathering she had ever seen. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the curved table, their attention focused on the holographic display floating in the center of the room. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of various classifications, she began with a slight bow. I know you have many questions about my people, about how we were able to defeat the Vorth when your combined fleets could not. The answer, I'm afraid, is both simple and terrible. Admiral Zethara leaned forward, her blue skin still pale from the stress of recent battles. Dr. Tanaka, our databases show no record of any world called Earth. How is it possible that an entire civilization could exist without our knowledge? Yuki smiled sadly and gestured to the hologram. The image changed to show a blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. It looked peaceful and beautiful from space, with white clouds swirling over vast oceans and green continents. This is Earth, she said, our homeworld. And you're right, it's not in your databases. Do you know why? Commander Vextok, the insect-like being who served as the Coalition's head of intelligence, made a clicking sound with his mandibles. We surveyed that system approximately 800 years ago. The planet was classified as uninhabitable due to extreme environmental conditions. Extreme environmental conditions, Yuki repeated. Yes, that's exactly right. Let me show you what that means. The hologram zoomed in on the planet's surface. Suddenly, the peaceful image became something from a nightmare. Massive storms swirled across the oceans, with winds that could level cities. Volcanoes erupted, spewing fire and ash into the atmosphere. The very ground split apart in earthquakes that reshaped entire continents. Our world kills us every day, Yuki said quietly. The weather alone has destroyed more human civilizations than any war. We have storms that can flatten forests, cold that can freeze blood in your veins, and heat that can cook flesh off bones. And that's just the beginning. She gestured again, and the image changed to show various earth creatures: a great white shark with rows of razor teeth, a grizzly bear that could crush bones with its bare hands, a tiny spider whose bite could kill in minutes. Everything on our world is designed to kill everything else. Even our smallest creatures are deadly. This little octopus, she pointed to what looked like a harmless blue-ringed creature, can kill 30 adult humans with one bite. This plant, now showing an innocent-looking tree, can blind you permanently just by walking underneath it. The alien representatives stared in horror at the images. Several of them made sounds that their translators couldn't convert into words. Captain Silenth of the Nexari, his crystalline body flickering with nervous energy, spoke up. How did your species possibly survive in such an environment? We adapted, Yuki replied. But not just physically. We adapted mentally. We learned that everything in the universe is trying to kill us, so we had better be prepared to fight back. We developed what you might call a very aggressive approach to problem solving. She changed the image again, this time showing human history. Primitive humans hunting massive beasts with nothing but spears. Ancient armies fighting with bronze weapons against impossible odds. Modern soldiers storming beaches under heavy fire. When your people encountered a problem they couldn't solve, what did you do? She asked. Admiral Zethara thought for a moment. We would study it. Consult with experts. Form committees to examine the issue from all angles. Very civilized, Yuki nodded. When humans encounter a problem we can't solve, we try to kill it. If that doesn't work, we try to kill it harder. If that still doesn't work, we find bigger weapons and try again. The room fell silent as the implications of this sank in. Dr. Melton, a blob-like being from the water world of Aquos, bubbled nervously. But surely your people must have some peaceful pursuits. Art, music, philosophy? Oh yes, Yuki said, brightening. We have wonderful art and music. We write poetry about the beauty of war. We compose symphonies about the glory of victory in battle. Our greatest philosophical works are about how to defeat our enemies more effectively. She paused and smiled at their shocked expressions. I'm exaggerating a little bit. We do have plenty of peaceful culture, but even our peaceful activities tend to be competitive. We turn everything into a contest. Who can run faster? Who can sing better? Who can grow the biggest vegetables? We compete with each other constantly because that's how we stay sharp. Commander Vextok clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. This explains your military effectiveness. But I still don't understand how you developed space technology while fighting for survival constantly. Because we're stubborn, Yuki replied with a laugh. Humans have a saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again. We don't accept failure as a final answer. When something tells us it's impossible, we take that as a personal challenge. The hologram changed to show human space exploration. Primitive rockets exploding on launch pads, followed by more advanced vehicles reaching orbit, then the moon, then other planets. Our first attempts at spaceflight killed most of the people involved, so we built better rockets. Those exploded too, so we built even better ones. We kept dying and kept building until finally we succeeded. How many of your people died in these experiments? Asked Captain Silenth. Thousands, Yuki said matter-of-factly. But every death taught us something new. Every failure made us stronger. We learned to think of setbacks as learning experiences rather than defeats. Admiral Zethara was studying the human ships visible through the conference room's windows. Your technology seems crude compared to our energy-based systems. Why didn't you develop more elegant solutions? Because crude works, Yuki replied. When you live on a world where everything wants to kill you, you don't have time for elegant. You need something that will stop a charging rhinoceros or a hunting tiger. You need it to work every time in any conditions, and you need it right now. She gestured to the human fleet outside. Those ships aren't pretty, but they're reliable. Those weapons aren't sophisticated, but they never fail. We built them to work in the worst possible conditions because that's the only conditions we know. But the Vorth, protested Lieutenant Kexmore. They've been adapting to every weapon we use against them. How do you stop something that learns from every attack? Yuki's smile turned predatory. You use weapons they can't adapt to. The Vorth are a biological species, right? They absorb other life forms and technologies to make themselves stronger. But they're still bound by the laws of physics. The hologram showed a human missile tearing through a Vorth bioship. You can't adapt to a chunk of metal moving at 3,000 meters per second. You can't absorb an explosion that turns everything within 50 meters into plasma. The Vorth got used to fighting civilized species with civilized weapons. They never met anything as primitive and violent as humans. The alien representatives exchanged looks of amazement and, Yuki had to admit, a little fear. Dr. Tanaka, Admiral Zethara said slowly, your people sound like they would be terrifying enemies. What assurance do we have that you won't turn those same weapons against us once the Vorth are defeated? Yuki's expression grew serious. Because we're also loyal. Humans form pack bonds stronger than most species can imagine. When we decide someone is part of our tribe, we'll die before we let harm come to them. Right now, everyone fighting the Vorth is part of our pack. She looked around the room at all the different faces watching her. Besides, we've been alone in the dark for so long. It's nice to finally have neighbors who aren't trying to eat us. Through the windows, human and coalition ships flew together in joint patrols, their different technologies working in harmony for the first time. The Vorth made one critical mistake, Yuki said as she began to pack up her presentation. They assumed the galaxy was like them. They thought everything could be consumed and absorbed. But humans can't be absorbed. We can only be killed and we don't die easily. As the meeting broke up, Admiral Zethara approached her privately. Dr. Tanaka, I have one more question. Are all humans like you? This violent, this aggressive? Yuki laughed. Oh no, Admiral. I'm one of the peaceful ones. I'm a scientist. You should meet our Marines. 6 months after the victory at Kepler Station, Admiral Zethara stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned Unity, watching the largest fleet in galactic history prepare for battle. Through the massive viewing windows, she could see ships from 14 different species floating in perfect formation. Human vessels with their brutal angles flew alongside elegant Altarian cruisers. Crystalline Nexari ships sparkled next to the organic curves of Kethmore biovessels. But it wasn't just the mixed technology that amazed her. It was how they fought together. All ships report ready for jump, announced Commander Elena Vasquez from the tactical station. The human officer had been assigned to help coordinate the joint fleet, and her aggressive style of command had rubbed off on everyone. Admiral Sarah Chen, standing beside Zethara, nodded approvingly at the display. 6 months ago, half these species wouldn't even talk to each other. Now look at them. It was true. The threat of extinction had accomplished what centuries of diplomacy could not. Ancient enemies now shared tactical data freely. Species that had fought border wars for generations now trusted each other with their most advanced technologies. More importantly, Zethara said, they're fighting like humans now. This was perhaps the most remarkable change. Coalition forces had always been precise and methodical, following established battle plans and elegant formations. But training with human instructors had taught them the value of chaos and surprise. Now they fought with controlled aggression, adapting instantly to changing conditions and always pressing forward no matter the odds. Fleet Admiral, came a transmission from one of the forward scouts. We're approaching the target system. Long-range sensors confirm massive Vorth presence around the primary planet. Chen smiled grimly. The Queen World. After 6 months of hunting down their scattered fleets, we finally found their home base. Through the jump point ahead of them lay the heart of the Vorth swarm. Intelligence reports suggested this system contained the central hive mind that controlled the entire species. Destroy it and the swarm would collapse into millions of mindless bioships. Of course, it was also the most heavily defended location in known space. Admiral, called out Lieutenant Kexmore from the sensor station. I'm reading over 20 million enemy contacts in the target system. Multiple defense rings around the central planet. These aren't just ships, ma'am. The entire system has been converted into a fortress. Any other fleet would have retreated at those numbers. The old coalition would have spent months debating strategy and looking for alternatives. But humans had taught them that sometimes the only way through an impossible situation was to charge straight ahead with guns blazing. Signal all ships, Chen ordered. Execute Plan Mjolnir. Zethara had to smile at the name. Humans had a talent for giving their battle plans dramatic names from ancient mythology. This particular plan was named after some kind of hammer wielded by their war gods. It was simple, direct, and completely insane by normal military standards. The jump began with the human ships going first, as they always did. The humans had a saying, first in, last out. They never asked anyone else to take risks they wouldn't take themselves. As the Unity emerged from hyperspace, Zethara gasped at what she saw. The Vorth hadn't just occupied this system. They had transformed it. Entire moons had been converted into living weapons platforms. The space between planets was filled with bioships so densely packed they looked like clouds of insects. And at the center of it all, the Queen world pulsed with malevolent life. "My God," whispered Dr. Tanaka from her position at the science station. "The entire planet is alive. It's one massive organism." But the humans didn't hesitate. Admiral Chen's voice rang out over the fleet communications. "All ships, weapons free. Let's finish this." What followed was the most violent battle in galactic history. The combined fleet smashed into the Vorth defenses like a hammer blow, human weapons tearing through bio-armor, while coalition energy beams sliced through living hull plates. Ships from a dozen worlds fought side by side, their crews shouting battle cries in languages that most of them couldn't understand, but somehow felt in their bones. Captain Marcus Rivera led a boarding action against a massive Vorth fortress creature, his Marines fighting alongside Altarian shock troops and Nixari crystal warriors. The different species had learned to complement each other's fighting styles, creating combinations that were far more effective than any single military tradition. "Push forward," Rivera shouted as his mixed unit carved their way through the creature's internal defenses. "These things can't adapt if we don't give them time to think." It was the key insight that had won them every battle for the past 6 months. The Vorth were incredibly dangerous when they had time to analyze and adapt to enemy tactics. But humans had taught the coalition forces to attack so fast and so aggressively that adaptation became impossible. Above them, Commander Vasquez coordinated the fighter squadrons with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Human pilots dove through formations of Vorth biofighters, while Kethmore atmospheric craft provided cover fire. The different technologies worked together like parts of a single organism, each species contributing their unique strengths to the whole. But the real battle was for the Queen world itself. Admiral Chen had taken personal command of the assault on the central planet, leading a spearhead formation of the heaviest ships in the fleet. As they approached the living world, it began to change, growing new weapons and defenses faster than any normal fortress could. "It's adapting to our attack patterns," reported the tactical officer. "The planet itself is learning how to fight us." "Then we don't give it time to learn," Chen replied. "All ships, full acceleration. We're going in fast and hard." The final assault was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Ships designed for space combat dove through the planet's atmosphere, their weapons blazing as they struck at the heart of the Vorth consciousness. The Queen world fought back with every weapon it could grow. But human tactics had taught the coalition forces that sometimes the best strategy was to ignore impossible odds and charge straight ahead. Lieutenant Kexmore, now commanding his own ship in the attack, found himself laughing as he dove toward the planet's surface. 6 months ago, he would have calculated the odds and probably retreated. Now he just focused on the target ahead and trusted his weapons to find their mark. "Target the central nervous clusters," Admiral Zethara ordered from her position coordinating the orbital bombardment. "If we can sever the connections between the different parts of the organism, it should collapse." The battle raged for hours, ships wheeling through the atmosphere like atmospheric fighters, while the planet below convulsed and writhed. Several times it looked like the Vorth might adapt successfully to the coalition tactics. But each time the human ships would do something completely unpredictable that threw off the calculations. Finally, Admiral Chen's flagship reached the planet's core. The Indomitable dove through layers of living tissue, its armor melting under bioacid attacks but its weapons never stopping their bombardment. "This is Chen to all ships," her voice crackled over the communications. "We've reached the central brain cluster. Beginning final attack run." The explosion, when it came, could be seen from the edge of the star system. The Queen world simply came apart, its living continents breaking away and floating dead in space. Across the entire galaxy, Vorth bioships suddenly went dormant as the controlling intelligence that had driven them was finally destroyed. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors and damage control teams worked to repair wounded vessels, Admiral Zethara found herself standing beside Admiral Chen on the observation deck of the Unity. "It's over," Chen said simply. "The swarm is finished." Around them, representatives from every species in the coalition were celebrating in their own unique ways. Some sang traditional victory songs, others performed ritual dances, and a few just sat in quiet contemplation of what they had accomplished. "What happens now?" Zethara asked. With the Vorth gone, will your people stay? Or will you return to your isolated world? Chen smiled and gestured toward the mixed crews working together throughout the ship. I don't think isolation is possible anymore. We've gotten used to having neighbors. Besides, the galaxy is a dangerous place. There might be other threats out there that need dealing with. Through the viewing windows, they could see human and coalition ships flying together in patrol formations, their crews already working on the next set of challenges facing galactic civilization. You know, Zethara said thoughtfully, 6 months ago, if someone had told me that the galaxy's salvation would come from a world so dangerous that we classified it as uninhabitable, I would have thought they were insane. Maybe that's